Those dogs were supposed to disappear beneath the snow, unseen, unnamed, and never missed. A starving German shepherd mother and her fragile puppies had been left in silence, as if their lives were worth less than the storm closing in around them. But something about them was wrong. And not just the cold, not just the hunger, not just the fear in the mother's eyes. Because these dogs had not simply been abandoned, they had been hidden. When a former Navy SEAL and his loyal dog found the trail leading to them, they stepped into a mystery no one in town wanted uncovered. What began as a rescue in the snow soon became a fight against a secret system built on silence, control, and forgotten lives. And before this story ends, you may find yourself believing that sometimes God sends help in the quietest, most unexpected way. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, or share your thoughts after the story. And please like and subscribe to support the channel and inspire more stories like this. Morning in Alders Bay did not begin with light. It began with the wind. It moved first through the black pines beyond the house, then down across the frozen yard, then finally through the narrow seams of Rowan Vance's old wooden walls, where it whistled in a thin, needling tone that sounded less like weather and more like warning. By the time Rowan opened his eyes, the room was still dim, the winter sky outside not yet fully awake. In the north, dawn often arrived reluctantly. In deep winter, it seemed to negotiate every inch. Rowan sat up without haste, but not softly. He was 41, 6 feet tall, lean and solid in the way of a man built by repetition instead of vanity. Nothing about him was oversized. His strength lived close to the bone. His face was clean-shaven, the square line of his jaw exposed to the cold light. His cheekbones pronounced beneath wind-roughened fair skin darkened by too many northern seasons outdoors. His dark brown hair was trimmed in a military cut, a little longer than regulation, but still shaped by old habit. His gray-blue eyes, when they opened, were already alert. People in town sometimes called him steady. The ones who knew him less called him distant. Both were true. A few years of war had trained him to read danger. The quieter years afterward had trained him to prefer wood smoke, silence, and tasks with measurable endings. Fix the hinge, split the logs, clear the path, feed the dog. Avoid the kind of conversations that wandered into pity. The dog was already awake. Orion stood near the front door with the patience of a sentinel. He was a 4 to 5-year-old German shepherd with a yellow-black coat dark along the back, warm gold at the chest and legs, and a black muzzle that sharpened the intelligence in his face. He was not oversized either. He had the compact, capable build of a working dog, all precision and restraint. His ears were upright, his amber-brown eyes fixed on the door, his old brown leather collar worn soft with use, a metal tag resting against his throat. He had the habit of watching first and moving second, as if the world only deserved action after careful review. "That's serious, huh?" Rowan muttered. Orion did not turn. He only shifted his weight once. Rowan dressed in the clothes that had become more uniform than choice. An old olive-gray tactical combat shirt, softened by years of washing and weather, faded at the shoulders and frayed lightly at the cuffs. Worn brown-green combat pants with slight wear at the knees and cargo pockets that sagged a little from long use. Old military work boots. His battered watch. Clothing that asked for nothing except movement. He opened the door, and cold came in like a blade. The yard beyond the porch had been erased overnight out into a wide white stillness. Snow covered the fence posts, the shed roof, the church road that curved down from the small white church on the rise. The lake beyond the trees lay frozen under a sky the color of old steel. It was a hard, beautiful emptiness, the kind that made a man feel both very alive and almost unnecessary. Orion stepped out first, then stopped. Not the pause of a dog catching scent. Not the alert angle he took when hearing a squirrel under drifted branches. This was something else. Stillness so complete it became a direction. Rowan followed his gaze. A narrow drag mark cut across the snow beyond the porch steps. It was not a boot track, not a tire mark, not the graceful line of a deer slipping through frost. It looked as if something had been pulled across the yard from the road, leaving behind a shallow, uneven scar in the fresh white surface. Snow had already begun to soften its edges, but not enough to hide its intention. The mark continued toward the lower field, then bent toward an old storage shed near the edge of the tree line. Rowan felt that quiet shift inside himself, the one he had never fully lost. Not fear. Focus. Orion started forward. Rowan followed, the snow breaking beneath his boots with a hard, dry sound. The wind pressed at his shirt and found the old aches buried in his shoulder and lower back. He ignored both. The drag mark grew fainter as they crossed the field, half swallowed by drifting powder. At one point, it nearly disappeared altogether, and Rowan might have lost it if Orion had not stopped, circled once, and corrected their path toward the shed. The building had once stored feed and tools before the roof began sagging under too many winters. Snow had drifted up against the door, nearly sealing it. Rowan reached for the handle, found it stiff with ice, and pulled hard. The smell hit him first: cold fur, damp wood, old fear. Then he saw them. A German shepherd mother lay in the far corner on a dirty blanket that had long ago stopped being useful. She was black and tan beneath grime and neglect, though the color in her coat looked worn out of her rather than merely hidden. She was too thin. Her hips showed. The line of her ribs pressed faintly beneath her fur. Around her neck, where the coat had thinned, a deep ring of pressure marked the place where something had held too long and too tightly. Two puppies were tucked against her body, small enough that their ears had not yet decided what shape to keep. They did not rise when the door opened. One merely flinched. The other did not move at all until its tiny side shivered. But it was the mother's face that stopped Rowan. She lifted her head once. Her eyes were a dark amber brown, dulled but not empty. They did not plead. They did not threaten. They carried the expression of a creature that had learned the cost of expecting kindness and decided expectation itself was too expensive. Behind Rowan, Orion did nothing. Then, slowly, he lowered his head and stepped inside. No bark, no warning, no attempt to dominate the space. He moved with the extraordinary care of something strong choosing gentleness. The mother dog tensed at once, every line of her thin body drawn taut, but she did not lunge. Orion stopped well short of her and looked away for half a second. The small, instinctive politeness of dogs who understood the language of fear better than most humans ever would. "If we do this wrong," Rowan said quietly, mostly to himself, "we lose them." He crouched, broad shoulders folding carefully, making himself smaller. The cold came up through his knees from the shed floor. One of the puppies gave a weak sound, more breath than cry. The mother's eyes flicked to it, then back to him. A memory rose uninvited. Another ruined place, another winter in another country. a child looking at him over broken concrete with the same expression. Not hope, not yet. A pause before judgment. Rowan hated memories that arrived without asking. He hated even more when they were right. "It's all right," he said, knowing full well that words were the least useful tools he had brought. He took off his glove and extended his hand, palm down, slow enough that the movement felt almost ceremonial. The dog watched him without blinking. Orion remained motionless behind him, not crowding, not urging. The wind pushed at the shed walls. Then the mother gave the smallest shift. Not trust, permission. Rowan let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. He moved quickly after that because cold did not care about emotions. He shrugged out of his outer layer, wrapped the stiller puppy first, then the other, each alarmingly light. The mother watched with a terrible concentration that made it clear she was measuring every decision he made. When he finally reached for her, she flinched at the sight of metal when his watch caught the weak morning light. Not much. Enough, he stopped. There it was. Not random fear. Patterned fear. He slid the watch under his sleeve and tried again. This time she allowed him close enough to check her breathing, her pause, the scar at her neck. Used, restrained, likely transported, not wild, not simply abandoned. Orion made a low sound in his throat then, not a growl, more a note. The mother's ears twitched toward him. Something in the air shifted, frail, uncertain, but real. That was when Rowan saw it. Beneath the dirt at her collar line, a faint indentation where a tag or strap had once rested. Whatever she had been, she had belonged somewhere before she was reduced to this. He gathered the puppies and backed out of the shed. The mother followed after a long second, moving stiffly, as if every muscle expected a blow that did not come. By the time they reached the house, the wind had changed. It no longer swept across the field in loose gusts. It came in longer, sharper drives, carrying the fine, dry snow that meant a storm front was turning. Inside, the warmth of the main room held poorly but honestly. The house was plain: wood stove, rough table, old chair, a narrow hall toward the bedroom, shelves built for use rather than beauty. Rowan set the puppies near the stove on folded blankets. Orion stayed a few feet away, lying sphinx-like but watchful. The mother remained standing, head low, eyes darting from door to window, to stove to man. Rowan filled a metal basin with warm water from the kettle. The basin touched the counter with a small, clean ring. At once the dog recoiled, not backward in confusion, downward. Her body compressed as if preparing for impact, her eyes wide with a memory more powerful than the room around her. Rowan froze. The sound had been tiny, barely anything, but she had heard in it some other place, some other room, some colder system of pain. "All right," he said softly. "No metal." He switched to an old ceramic bowl instead. As he knelt to wash one of the puppies, Orion rose without warning and walked to the front window. He did not bark. He did not stiffen in the usual way dogs did when strangers came too close. He simply stood there, head lifted, body perfectly still, the fur along his shoulders not raised but alert. Rowan followed his line of sight. Beyond the frost-clouded glass, through the thickening veil of snow, a vehicle sat on the church road. An old pickup. Dark. Idling. Not passing. Watching. For one long breath, nothing moved except the exhaust lifting into the winter air. Then the truck eased forward, rolled a little closer to the house, and stopped again. Something cold and old moved under Rowan's ribs. Not panic, but recognition. The kind that came when a thing stopped looking accidental. He did not go to the window immediately. He watched Orion first. The dog never made a sound. That, more than the truck itself, unsettled him. Then the wind surged hard against the glass, and when Rowan stepped nearer, the pickup had already begun to disappear into the whitening road, swallowed by snow before he could make out the plate or the driver's face. The room seemed smaller after that. He returned to the puppies, but his mind no longer moved in a straight line. Stray dog, drag mark, scar around the neck, fear of metal, watching truck, storm coming in. None of it made a story yet, but it had stopped being random. He finished cleaning the pups, rubbing warmth gently back into tiny legs and paws. One of them, the smaller, finally made a sound like a frayed squeak and pushed weakly against his palm. The mother heard it and stepped closer despite herself. "Yeah," Rowan murmured. "That one's stubborn." He glanced at the dog. "So are you." Names mattered more than people admitted. He had learned that in war and afterward. The nameless vanished first in memory. "Mira," he said, looking at the mother, "you need one." The dog did not respond, of course, but the sound settled into the room as if it had been waiting. He set food down near the stove and backed away. Mira approached only after Orion rose and moved farther off, giving her the space she had been denied for too long. She sniffed the bowl, then turned first to the puppies, licking each one with quick, anxious precision before eating. Rowan noticed that too. Some instincts survived even systematic cruelty. Maybe those were the holiest ones. Outside, the day dimmed early under storm clouds. The little white church on the hill blurred into the landscape until its outline looked ghosted. Snow thickened. Wind began to test the walls in earnest. Rowan checked the latch, brought in more wood, and set a heavier blanket near the stove. Mira watched his every movement. Orion eventually lay down again, but not in sleep. His gaze kept drifting toward the door. "Seen that truck before?" Rowan asked him dryly. Orion's ear twitched once. The smallest puppy had begun to breathe more evenly now. The other shifted in sleep, chasing some dream kind enough not to resemble real life. Rowan sat in the old chair with his elbows on his knees and looked at the room as if it belonged to somebody else. A man who had wanted peace. A dog who had not let peace stay simple. A half-dead mother and two pups carried in by a drag mark that should not have existed in fresh snow. He should have felt burdened. Instead, he felt something more dangerous. Awake. Toward evening, while the storm gathered itself in full and the windows turned white around the edges, Rowan rose to place another log on the fire. The poker slipped in the stand, and a small metal chime sounded as it struck the hearthstone. Mira jerked so violently she nearly crashed into the wall. Not fear of him, not fear of the room, fear of what that sound had meant elsewhere. Orion stood immediately, not braced to attack, but angled toward her in a calm, protective line. He did not touch her. He merely placed himself where she could see him. The puppies stirred. Mira's sides heaved once, twice, then slowly settled. Rowan looked from one dog to the other and understood, though only partly. Whatever had happened to her, Orion was translating the world back into something survivable. Night pressed in early. The wind sharpened into a full-throated howl around the house, and the first true sweep of the blizzard struck the windows in white bursts. Rowan closed the curtain halfway, then stopped. Out there beyond the porch, faint through the racing snow. Lights moved once along the road, not passing this time, pausing. Orion rose again. No bark, no growl, only that fixed, impossible stillness. Rowan stood beside him, his own reflection pale in the glass, his hand unconsciously settling near the old military watch beneath his cuff. Neither man nor dog moved. Behind them, Mira curled at last around her two puppies, though her eyes remained open. Outside, the truck waited one beat too long in the storm. Then, slowly, it rolled on into the whiteness and was gone. The storm did not arrive in a single moment. It built itself, first in the tightening air, then in the way the trees stopped swaying and began to resist, and finally in the sound, the long, low pressure of wind turning into something that had direction and intent. By mid-morning, Alders Bay had vanished into white. From the window, the world no longer looked like a place. It looked like absence. Rowan Vance stood near the glass, one hand resting lightly against the frame, feeling the faint tremor of each gust through the wood. His reflection stared back at him in broken fragments between streaks of frost. Behind that reflection, the storm thickened. "You picked a bad day," he murmured, not to himself. Orion was already moving. The German shepherd circled the room in a slow, deliberate pattern, not restless, not panicked, but attentive in a way that suggested he was listening for something neath the storm rather than reacting to it. His ears shifted in small adjustments, catching angles of sound too subtle for a human to track. Every few passes, he paused near the back door, nose angled low, as if reading a language written in air and snow. Rowan watched him for a second, then turned back to the stove. The house had begun to warm unevenly. The fire held, but the cold pressed at every surface, creeping in through seams, settling into the floorboards. He added another log, adjusted the damper, and then moved toward the corner where Mira and her two puppies lay. They were alive. That alone felt like a fragile victory. The smaller of the two pups stirred weakly beneath the blanket, its breathing still shallow but no longer fading. The other had begun to shift in its sleep, tiny paws twitching in uncertain dreams. Mira lay curled around them, her body forming a protective arc that did not fully relax even in exhaustion. She watched him. Not with fear anymore, not entirely, but not with trust either. It was something in between, a space that did not yet have a name. Rowan crouched slowly, keeping his movements predictable. He had learned long ago that unpredictability was what broke people and animals first. "Food's there," he said quietly, gesturing toward the bowl he had placed earlier. Mira's eyes flicked to it, then back to him. She did not move. Orion approached from the side, not directly, not crowding her, and lay down a few feet away, his posture open, non-threatening. After a moment, Mira shifted, just enough to reach the bowl with a cautious stretch of her neck. She ate quickly, but not frantically, pausing twice to glance back at her before continuing. Rowan exhaled softly. "That's something." The wind struck the house harder then, a solid force that rattled the window and sent a fine spray of snow against the glass. The sound filled the room like static. Somewhere outside, something loose hit wood in a hollow, irregular rhythm. Mira flinched, not as violently as before, but enough. Rowan stilled again. He followed the line of her tension, the way her ears angled, the slight tightening at her shoulders. It wasn't random. It never was. Patterns, he thought. Everything had patterns. He straightened and crossed the room, securing the loose latch on the side wall, tightening it until the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was immediate, almost unnatural. Behind him, Mira's body eased by a fraction. That was the difference. Not noise, not quiet, control. Rowan filed that away without thinking about it too much. He had spent years cataloging reactions like that, building maps out of other people's fear. He had hoped he would not need those skills again. He was wrong. A sudden knock came at the door. Not loud, not desperate, measured. Orion's head snapped toward it instantly, but he did not bark. He stood, weight forward, body angled, not toward the door, but slightly to the side of Rowan's position, as if already calculating space. Rowan didn't move right away. The storm howled. The knock came again. Same rhythm. Not random. He stepped forward, one hand resting lightly against the wood before opening. When the door cracked, wind forced its way in, carrying snow and cold in a sharp breath. Framed in that white chaos stood a woman. She was smaller than Rowan had expected, maybe 5'5", but there was a steadiness to her posture that kept her from seeming fragile. June Halperin's coat was dusted thick with snow, her gray wool scarf wrapped twice around her neck, ends stiff with frost. Strands of her light brown hair had escaped from under a knit cap, clinging damply to her cheeks. Her skin had gone pale with cold, but her eyes, sharp, focused, green-gray, were alert in a way that didn't belong to someone simply trying to get out of a storm. "You going to let me freeze?" she said, voice tight but controlled. "Or is this still a place people can walk into?" Rowan stepped back without a word. She entered quickly, shutting the door behind her with effort. For a second, she just stood there, letting her body adjust, her breath uneven. "You shouldn't have walked," Rowan said. "I didn't have much choice." Her voice carried something beneath it. Not fear, not quite. Urgency. June unwound her scarf slowly, her hands stiff as she flexed her fingers. She moved toward the stove without asking, holding them near the heat. Up close, Rowan saw the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the kind that came from years of squinting at details, from reading too much into things most people ignored. "You found them," she said after a moment, nodding toward Mira. Rowan's gaze sharpened slightly. "You know her?" June hesitated. Not long, but enough. "I've seen her," she said. "Not here." She stepped closer, crouching just outside Mira's space. She didn't reach out. She didn't try to touch. She simply looked. "That's her," she said quietly. "Or it was." Rowan watched her now, not the dog. "Start explaining." June leaned back on her heels, her expression tightening as if she were choosing how much to say. "I used to work for the local paper," she said, "before it stopped being a paper and started being something else." Rowan didn't interrupt. "There was a series we were building," she continued, "about the animal rescue program. Calder Vale's organization. Funding, transport, placement. It all looked clean on the surface. Too clean." Her eyes flicked back to Mira. They had before and after photos, intake records, success stories. She paused. "I saw her face in one of those files. Same markings, same eyes." Mira shifted slightly, her ears angling toward June's voice, though she did not lift her head. She was listed as rehomed. June's voice dropped. Months ago. Silence filled the room for a second, broken only by the wind pressing against the house. Rowan straightened slowly. And now she's half dead in a storage shed. June nodded once. That's the part that doesn't fit. Orion moved then, stepping between them and the door again, his attention drawn back to something unseen outside. His tail remained still, his posture controlled. June noticed. He always like that? She asked. No, Rowan said. That was enough. A sudden, low vibration rolled through the floorboards, so faint it might have been missed if not for the way Orion reacted. The dog's head snapped upward, ears rigid, body going completely still. Not alert, not defensive, listening. Rowan felt it a second later, not through his ears but through the soles of his boots. A distant, heavy resonance, like something large moving over a surface that carried sound differently. June looked at him. You feel that? Rowan didn't answer. He was already moving toward the window. The storm had thickened again, visibility nearly gone. Snow crossed the glass in diagonal sheets. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a shadow. Low. Wide. Moving. Across the lake. It passed between two blurred shapes of trees, its outline just visible enough to suggest mass. Not a snowmobile. Too large. Too steady. A vehicle. On ice. June exhaled slowly. No one drives out there in this. Not unless they know exactly what they're doing, Rowan said. Or unless they didn't care if they didn't make it back. Orion made a low sound then, something deeper than before. Not warning. Recognition. The vibration faded. The shadow disappeared into the white. But the feeling it left behind did not. Rowan stepped back from the window, his mind already shifting into that quiet, analytical space he had once relied on for survival. They're moving something, June said. In this? Rowan glanced toward the storm. That's not transport. That's urgency. June nodded slowly. Or secrecy. Behind them, one of the puppies let out a small, strained whine. Mira immediately shifted, nudging it closer, her attention snapping back to the present. Rowan looked at her again, at the scar around her neck, the way her body still carried tension even in warmth. What kind of rescue runs like that? He asked. June didn't answer right away. The fire cracked softly. The wind pressed harder. Not the kind they tell people about, she said at last. Rowan crossed the room, checking the latch again, then the back door. His hand paused at the handle for a moment as he noticed something. The snow outside the back entrance. Disturbed. Not heavily. Not obvious. But wrong. The pattern was too smooth in one place, too broken in another. Like something had moved there and then been partially covered again by drifting snow. Orion was already there, nose low, tracing the edge of that disturbance. Rowan opened the door just enough to look out. Cold hit him again, sharper now. He crouched, studying the ground. A faint impression, half a print, half a smear. Not old, not from the morning. Someone came through here, he said quietly. June stepped closer behind him. In this storm? Rowan stood slowly. They didn't stay long. Orion lifted his head, looking out into the white. Rowan followed his gaze. There was nothing. just snow, wind, absence. But absence, he knew, was not the same as emptiness. He closed the door again, locking it this time. The room felt smaller, not because of space, because something had stepped into the edges of it, unseen, uninvited. Rowan returned to the stove, but he did not sit. June wrapped her scarf tighter around her neck, though she was no longer cold. Mira watched them both. Orion remained near the door. Outside, the storm deepened, swallowing the road, the lake, the town. Inside, something had shifted. Not loud, not obvious, but enough. The storm did not end. It weakened. That was worse. By dawn, the wind had lost its constant howl and broken into long, uneven breaths that moved across the land in pulses. The sky above Alder's Bay lightened slightly, not into warmth, not into hope, but into a pale, strained gray that revealed just enough to make distance visible again. And distance, Rowan Vance knew, was where mistakes lived. The temperature had dropped further in the night, the kind of cold that didn't bite. It settled. It pressed into joints, slowed reactions, made simple decisions take longer than they should. Rowan stood near the door, one hand resting against the frame, feeling the stillness between gusts. June sat at the table behind him, her gloved hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug, though the coffee inside had already gone lukewarm. She hadn't slept. The shadows beneath her eyes made that clear, but her gaze remained sharp, following every movement Rowan made like she was mapping it. "You're actually going out there," she said. It wasn't a question. Rowan didn't turn. "If I wait," he said, "there won't be anything left to follow." June exhaled slowly. Not disagreement, recognition. "Then you don't go alone." Rowan glanced back at her. "This isn't a walk," he said. "It's not even a search. It's—" "I know what it is," June cut in more quietly now. "I've been looking at this longer than you have. You just started caring." The words could have landed wrong. They didn't. Rowan studied her for a second longer, then nodded once. "Then you stay here," he said. "If something comes back while we're gone, you'll know faster than I will." June's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. "Bring back more than guesses," she said. Rowan pulled on his outer coat, thick, worn, functional. Orion was already at the door. When Rowan opened it, the cold didn't rush in this time. It waited, then settled. The world outside had changed. Not erased anymore, but incomplete. The outlines of the fence had returned. The slope toward the lake was visible again, though softened by fresh layers of snow. The road was gone entirely beneath a seamless white stretch. Orion stepped out first. He didn't charge forward. He paused, adjusted, then moved. Rowan followed, placing each step with intention. The snow gave underfoot differently now, lighter on top, denser beneath. A bad combination. Easy to slip, easy to misjudge. They reached the edge of the yard where the ground dipped toward the lake. The faint disturbance Rowan had seen the night before was still there, but barely. Orion circled it once, twice, then moved off in a direction Rowan wouldn't have chosen. He let him. Trust wasn't blind. It was tested. The path wasn't straight. Several times Orion stopped completely, head low, nose working through the cold air. Once he turned back 10 feet, retraced his steps, and corrected course. Another time he paused so long, Rowan thought they had lost it entirely, until the dog shifted slightly to the left and continued. That was when Rowan knew they were still on something real. No animal tracked perfectly in this, only something that had learned to keep trying. The trees thinned as they approached the lake, and then the surface appeared. Alder's Bay, frozen. It stretched out like a field of dull glass beneath the gray sky, its edges buried in snowdrifts, its center marked by faint variations in color where the ice thickened and thinned. The kind of place that looked solid until it wasn't. Rowan stopped at the edge. He scanned first, then stepped out. The ice held. Orion didn't hesitate. He moved across it with the quiet confidence of something that understood weight distribution better than most men ever would. Rowan followed more cautiously, his steps measured, his balance centered. About 30 yards out, the marks appeared. Not clear, but there. A pair of parallel impressions beneath a thin layer of drifted snow, subtle enough that without knowing what to look for, they would have been missed entirely. Tires. Rowan crouched, brushing away a small patch with his glove. The pattern was faint, but consistent. Recent. Too recent. He straightened slowly. They didn't stop, he said aloud, though Orion didn't need the words. The tracks led across the lake toward a structure barely visible near the far edge. A low building, weathered, partially buried. A storage facility, maybe, or something that used to be. Orion was already moving again. They crossed the rest of the distance in silence. The building revealed itself slowly as they approached. A long, rectangular structure with a sloped roof weighed down by snow. One side faced the lake, its lower section reinforced with timber. The door on that side was sealed shut, ice locked into every seam. Rowan circled. The wind had done part of the work for him. At the rear, a section of outer paneling had loosened, pulled slightly away from its frame by repeated pressure. Just enough. Rowan tested it. It gave. Not easily, but enough. He widened the gap, careful not to snap the wood outright. Noise traveled differently in cold. Inside, the air changed immediately. Not warmer. Controlled. The scent hit him first. Disinfectant. Metal. Something else beneath it. Contained. Orion stepped in beside him. No hesitation, but slower now. They moved through a narrow passage that opened into a larger interior space, and then Rowan saw it. Rows. Not chaos, not neglect. Order. Metal cages lined in uniform spacing, each one clean, each one empty. Hooks mounted along one wall, some still holding lengths of worn nylon restraint. A table at the center, its surface marked by repeated use but wiped clean. No names, only numbers. White tags attached to each enclosure. No blood, no noise. Just absence. Rowan stood very still. This was not abandonment. This was design. Orion moved ahead, toward the far corner. That was where she lay. The dog. Older. A German shepherd like Mira, but worn further, deeper. Her coat had thinned in uneven patches, the black along her back broken by gray, the gold dulled into something colorless. One ear tilted slightly off angle, the result of an old injury never set right. Her body was too light for her frame. Her eyes were open, but unfocused. She didn't track Rowan, didn't react to the movement, didn't even flinch when Orion approached. Orion stopped just short of her, then did something Rowan had never seen him do. He lowered himself fully to the ground, front legs extended, head down, not in submission, not in play, in recognition. The older dog's eyes shifted, slowly, not toward Rowan, toward Orion. Her body trembled, a small, involuntary movement, and then her head lifted a fraction, barely enough to count, but enough. Rowan felt something tighten in his chest. Not fear. Understanding. This dog wasn't gone. She was waiting for something she had not seen in a long time. Orion held the position, didn't move closer, didn't press, just remained. After a few seconds, the trembling eased. The dog lowered her head again, but not all the way, not where it had been. Rowan stepped forward carefully. "Hey," he said, voice low. No response. He crouched. The dog didn't look at him, but she didn't withdraw either. He checked her breathing, shallow, but steady. He glanced at the restraints on the wall, then at the collar line around her neck. Same pattern, same system. He looked back at the room. This wasn't a place where animals were kept. This was a place where they were processed, sorted, moved. "Orion," he said quietly. The dog lifted his head slightly. "We're not the first ones here." Orion stood. He turned once, scanning the room, not for movement but for something else. A trace. A shift. Something left behind. Rowan followed his gaze. Near the far wall, half hidden beneath a thin layer of frost, something lay on the floor. He crossed to it. A tag. Metal. Rectangular. He picked it up. The surface was scratched, partially worn, but the engraving remained. A V-Transit/Unit 4. Rowan turned it over in his hand. Cold. Deliberate. Not a mistake. He slipped it into his pocket. Behind him, Orion returned to the older dog, standing beside her now, not guarding, not claiming, accompanying. Rowan took one last look around the room. Everything in place. Everything accounted for. Except what wasn't there anymore. He moved back toward the opening. "Come on," he said. Orion hesitated, just for a second, then followed. The wind outside had picked up again, though not as violently as before. Snow moved low across the surface of the lake, like something alive skimming just above the ground. Rowan paused at the edge of the ice and looked back once. The building stood still, silent, as if nothing inside it had ever mattered. But he knew better now. This wasn't rescue. This wasn't failure. This was a system, and he had just stepped inside it. The storm loosened its grip, but it did not leave. It lingered in the air, in the brittle cold that followed, in the way the sky remained colorless long after morning should have arrived. Alders Bay reappeared slowly, not as a place waking up, but as something uncovered. Rowan Vance drove into town just after noon. The road had been partially cleared, though not well. Snowbanks rose unevenly along both sides, packed hard and gray where plows had passed, soft and untouched where they hadn't. The town itself looked unchanged at first glance. Same small storefronts, same narrow sidewalks, same white church standing slightly above everything else like a quiet witness. But Rowan saw the difference. He saw it in the way people moved. Not hurried, not relaxed. Measured. As if everyone had agreed, without speaking, to continue as if nothing had happened. Orion sat in the passenger seat, alert but still, his gaze tracking the slow movement of figures outside the truck window. His ears shifted occasionally, catching fragments of sound, but he did not react to anything openly. Not yet. Rowan parked near the general store. The bell above the door gave a dull, tired ring as he stepped inside. Heat wrapped around him immediately, carrying the smell of coffee, old wood, and something faintly sweet, pastries maybe, or something left too long in the oven. The woman behind the counter looked up. Irene Bell. She was somewhere in her late 60s, small-framed but upright, with short silver hair cut close to her head in a practical style that didn't ask for maintenance. Her face was narrow, lined not with softness but with observation, the kind of lines that came from watching more than speaking. Her eyes were pale blue, sharp despite her age. "I was wondering when you'd come down," she said. Rowan didn't smile. "Didn't know I was expected." Irene gave a slight shrug, wiping her hands on a cloth. "You've been here long enough," she said. "People start noticing when you stop doing what you usually do." Her gaze shifted briefly to Orion. "And when your dog starts watching things he didn't care about before." Rowan stepped closer to the counter. "Seen anything last night?" Irene didn't answer right away. She reached for a coffee pot, poured into a chipped mug, and slid it toward him. Not an offering, a delay. "Storm was bad," she said. "Didn't see much of anything." Rowan waited. Irene looked at him again. Then quieter. "Didn't see it clearly." There it was. Rowan's fingers tightened slightly around the mug. "What did you see?" Irene leaned her weight on the counter. "A truck," she said. "Heavy, not local. Passed through before the worst of it hit." She paused. "Didn't stop here. Where'd it go?" Her eyes flicked toward the back window of the store, where the road curved out toward the lake. Same direction everything goes when it doesn't want to be noticed. Rowan nodded once. No more questions. Not because there weren't more to ask, because he understood the boundary. Irene wasn't refusing. She was offering exactly what she believed she could afford to give. Nothing more. Outside, the air felt colder after the warmth of the store. Rowan stood for a moment beside the truck, looking down the road Irene had indicated. Snow still covered most of the tracks, but the weight of something large had left subtle compression beneath the surface. Orion shifted in the seat, not restless, focused. Rowan opened the door. "Stay," he said. Orion didn't move. That wasn't obedience. That was agreement. Rowan followed the road on foot this time, boots crunching through uneven layers of snow. The further he went, the fewer signs of town remained. Houses gave way to open stretches, then to tree lines, and then a figure, standing near the edge of the road, partially obscured by the shadow of a leaning pine. Rowan slowed. The man didn't move away. He stepped forward instead. Mid-30s, maybe. Broad-shouldered but not bulky. His build suggested labor rather than training. Strength that came from repetition, not discipline. His hair was dark, cut unevenly as if by his own hand. Stubble covered his jaw, not neatly kept, but not neglected either. His coat was heavy, practical, worn at the elbows. His hands, visible even through gloves, were scarred across the knuckles. His eyes were the only thing that didn't match the rest of him. They were careful. Rowan Vance, the man said. Not a question. Rowan stopped a few feet away. Do I know you? The man gave a small, humorless smile. No, he said. But I know what you found. Rowan didn't react outwardly. People talk, the man continued. Not out loud, but enough. Name, Rowan said. The man hesitated. Then, Noah Pike. Rowan nodded slightly. What do you want, Noah? Noah glanced once over his shoulder toward the tree line, then back. To tell you something before you go too far. Rowan's expression didn't change. Then say it. Noah shifted his weight. They're not losing anything, he said. Not by accident. The wind moved through the trees behind him. They move things, Noah continued. Sort them. Send them where they're supposed to go. His jaw tightened. If something shows up where it shouldn't, it means something went wrong. Rowan stepped closer. And you're telling me this why? Noah's eyes flickered. Because I drive one of the routes, he said. Silence settled between them. And you don't like what you're moving, Rowan said. Noah didn't answer that. He didn't need to. Orion appeared then. Rowan hadn't heard him approach. The dog moved past Rowan straight toward Noah, calm, controlled, not aggressive. Noah froze, not out of fear, recognition. Orion stopped just short of him, lifted his head slightly, and inhaled. Then, he stepped to the side, not blocking, not confronting, just placing himself where Noah could see him clearly. Noah's expression changed. Something in it broke open, just for a second. I've seen dogs like him, Noah said quietly. Not out here, not anymore. Rowan watched him closely. What does that mean? Noah shook his head once as if dismissing the thought. It means, he said, you don't understand how far this goes. Orion turned then, looking back at Rowan. Not urging, not warning, just waiting. That was enough. Rowan stepped back. What happens when something goes wrong? He asked. Noah exhaled slowly. They correct it. How? Another pause, then. They don't leave loose ends. Rowan held his gaze. And you're still working for them. Noah's jaw tightened. For now. The wind shifted again, sharper this time. Noah stepped back. You didn't hear this from me, he said. Rowan didn't respond. Noah turned, disappearing into the trees without another word. Orion watched him go, then looked back at Rowan. The message was clear, even without language. This wasn't random. This wasn't isolated. This was structure. Rowan returned to the truck in silence. By the time he reached the house, the light had already begun to fade again. June was waiting. She stood near the table, papers spread out, her coat off now, sleeves rolled slightly as if she had been working through something methodically. You went farther than I thought, she said. Rowan closed the door behind him. Not far enough. June studied his face. Who did you talk to? Driver, Rowan said. Name's Noah Pike. June's expression sharpened. I've seen that name, she said. She moved quickly, flipping through a stack of printed pages. Transport logs, partial records. Nothing official, but enough to suggest. She stopped, her finger resting on a line. That he's part of it. Rowan nodded. He confirmed it without saying it. June leaned back slightly, processing. So it's not just one location, she said. It's movement. Distribution. Rowan glanced toward the corner where Mira lay. She had shifted again, not away from the room, toward it. She watched him enter this time without shrinking. A small change, but real. "She ate while you were gone," June said quietly. Rowan looked at her. "Not much," June added. But she didn't wait for Orion first. Rowan exhaled. That mattered more than anything else they had uncovered so far. Across the room, Orion moved to lie down near the door again. Always the door, always the edge. Rowan stepped closer to Mira, crouching as he had before. She didn't retreat, didn't lean in either, but she stayed. That was enough. Outside, the wind rose again, not as violent as before, but steady, persistent. Inside, something had shifted, not solved, not safe, but different. Rowan sat back on his heels, his mind moving through everything they had gathered. The system, the movement, the correction, the silence of the town, and the one thing that mattered most. Nothing here was accidental. The night after the storm did not bring peace. It brought silence. Not the quiet that settled over a resting town, not the calm that followed survival. This silence had weight. It pressed against the walls, settled into the corners, stretched thin across the yard like something waiting to be disturbed. Rowan Vance felt it before he understood it. He stepped out onto the porch just after midnight, the cold cutting sharper now that the wind had mostly withdrawn. The sky had cleared enough to reveal a hard scatter of stars above the frozen land, their light distant and indifferent. The world looked still. Too still. Orion stood just ahead of him, already outside, already searching. Not running. Not yet. Rowan moved down the steps, boots finding uncertain grip on the thin layer of ice that had formed over the packed snow. His breath fogged in short bursts, his body instinctively adjusting to the cold. Behind him, the house remained quiet. Too quiet. He stopped halfway across the yard. Something was wrong. Not visible. Not obvious. But present. He turned back toward the house, his gaze moving across the windows, the door, the fence line. Then he felt it. Absence. Rowan didn't rush. He walked back inside. June looked up from the chair near the stove, her expression shifting immediately at the sight of his face. "What is it?" she asked. Rowan didn't answer. He crossed the room in 3 steps and dropped to one knee beside the blanket where Mira and the puppies lay. Mira was awake, her head lifted, her body already tense. One puppy stirred weakly, the other. Rowan's hand hovered over empty space. Gone. June stood up slowly behind him. "No," she said under her breath. Rowan scanned the area quickly. No signs of struggle. No overturned objects. No blood. Just nothing. That was worse. Mira let out a low, broken sound then. Not loud. Not a bark. Something deeper, pulled from a place that had not healed yet. She moved frantically now, nose pressing into the blanket, the floor, the edges of the space where her pup had been. Rowan stood. His chest tightened, not with panic, with clarity. "This wasn't random," he said. June stepped closer. "How can you tell?" Rowan pointed. Near the edge of the wooden wall, barely visible unless you were looking for it. A scratch. Thin, precise. Not from a claw fighting, from something catching as it moved. and just above it, a thread, gray, caught on a splinter of wood. Fabric. Not from the house, not from anything they owned. June's breath caught slightly. "They came inside," she said. Rowan nodded once. And they knew exactly where to go. Orion was already at the back door. He didn't wait. He didn't look back. He moved. Rowan followed. The door opened into a rush of cold, but Orion was already across the yard, his body low, fast, controlled. "Orion!" Rowan called once. The dog didn't stop. That told him everything. Rowan ran. The ground was worse now than it had been during the storm. The top layer had frozen unevenly, creating a brittle surface that cracked and shifted under each step. Visibility dropped the further he moved away from the house, the moonlight swallowed by the trees and the lingering haze of blown snow. Orion slowed once, turned, not to return, to check, then continued. Rowan pushed forward, following the line of movement, though he couldn't see what Orion saw. The world had become a blur of white and shadow, depth distorted, distance unreliable. His foot slipped, hard. The ice beneath him gave just enough to send his weight sideways. He hit the ground with a dull impact, breath knocked halfway out of him. Cold surged through his body instantly, sharp and disorienting. For a second, he lost direction. Up felt sideways, the trees blurred, the ground tilted, and then stillness. Orion stood 5 feet ahead of him, not moving, not approaching, not pulling, just standing, square, visible, a fixed point in a world that had lost shape. Rowan stared at him. His breathing slowed, his vision steadied. He pushed himself up, boots finding ground again, balance returning piece by piece. Orion didn't move until Rowan did. That was the difference. He hadn't been pulled back. He had been given something to orient himself against. Rowan stepped forward. Orion turned, and they moved again. The trail was nearly gone now, not erased, disrupted. Wind had shifted direction, scattering the top layer of snow, breaking whatever pattern had existed before. Rowan could see nothing clear, nothing consistent. But Orion kept going, not fast, not certain, but forward. Several times, he veered slightly off, then corrected, circling back, recalibrating. His movements were tighter now, more deliberate, as if the signal he followed had weakened but not disappeared. Rowan trusted that more than anything perfect. They reached the tree line. The forest closed around them, the branches heavy with snow, the ground uneven beneath layers of frozen drift. Sound changed here. The wind softened, filtered through the trees, replaced by a quieter, more enclosed stillness. And then, a structure, half buried, dark against the snow. Rowan slowed. The building had once been something functional, a workshop maybe, or a storage facility for timber work. Now it stood abandoned, its outer walls weathered gray, sections of the roof sagging under accumulated snow. No lights, no sound, no movement. Orion didn't hesitate. He moved straight toward it. Rowan followed, his hand instinctively brushing the side of his coat where years ago something else would have rested. Old habits. The front entrance was sealed. Ice and time had done their work. Rowan circled. The side wall showed signs of damage, older than the storm, but worsened by it. A section of wood had split slightly, creating a narrow opening. He widened it carefully. Inside, darkness held, cold, still, but not empty. Orion entered first, and then stopped. Completely. Not alert, not tense. Frozen. Rowan stepped in behind him. "What is it?" Orion didn't respond. He stood facing the far side of the room, body rigid, ears forward, eyes locked. Rowan followed his gaze. At first, nothing. Just shadows. Shapes. Then, a sound. Soft. Irregular. Breathing. Not strong. Not steady. But there. Rowan moved forward slowly, each step deliberate, controlled. The air inside carried a different scent than the previous facility. Less chemical. More neglected. But beneath it, the same underlying pattern. He reached the far side and saw it. A crate. Not metal this time. Wood. Reinforced. Vent holes cut into the sides. One panel slightly ajar. He crouched. Inside. Movement. Small. Weak. Alive. Rowan exhaled slowly. "Easy," he said, though the words were for himself as much as anything else. He opened the panel further. The interior was dark, lined with rough fabric. And there, a small body, curled, trembling. Pip. The puppy's eyes were open, but unfocused, its breathing shallow, its body stiff with cold and fear. Orion stepped closer then, not rushing, not crowding. He lowered his head slightly, just enough for Pip to catch his scent. The puppy twitched. Then, a small movement, toward him. Rowan reached in, hands steady, lifting the pup carefully, supporting its fragile frame. Pip didn't struggle, didn't cry, just pressed weakly against his palm. Rowan held him close. "Got you," he said quietly. Behind him, Orion shifted. Rowan turned slightly. The room wasn't empty after all. Along the far wall, barely visible in the dim light. More crates, closed, sealed. Rowan's jaw tightened. Not abandoned. Stored. Waiting. He stood slowly. Pip held securely against his chest. Orion remained still for a moment longer, then turned. Ready. Rowan took one last look at the crates, then followed. The forest felt colder on the way back. Not because the temperature had dropped, because now he knew what moved within it. Rowan kept his steps careful, his focus split between the path ahead and the small, fragile weight in his arms. Pip's breathing remained uneven, but present. That was enough. Orion stayed close now, not leading, accompanying. They reached the edge of the yard just as the first hint of wind returned, stirring the surface of the snow in thin, shifting lines. June opened the door before Rowan reached it. She saw the puppy, didn't speak, just stepped aside. Rowan moved inside, the warmth hitting him in a sudden, almost painful contrast. He knelt beside the fire, placing Pip gently back near Mira. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Mira moved. Fast. She pressed her nose against the puppy, checking, confirming, her body trembling with something that was not fear anymore. Relief. Raw. Unfiltered. Rowan sat back slowly. Orion lay down near the door again. Same place and same position. But something had changed. This time, he closed his eyes. Not fully, but enough. Rowan watched him, then looked at the door, then at the walls, then at the space beyond all of it. They didn't take him by accident, he said. June nodded. No, she said quietly. They took him because they could. Silence settled again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one held meaning. The cold inside the structure felt different, not sharper, deeper. It didn't strike the skin and fade. It settled into bone, into breath, into the slow rhythm of a body trying to stay warm in a place that did not intend to offer it. Rowan Vance noticed that first. The second thing he noticed was the silence, not empty, held, like something waiting to be acknowledged. He stood just inside the threshold of the workshop, one arm cradling Pip close to his chest, the small puppy wrapped in his outer layer for warmth. Pip's breathing was still uneven, but present, his body no longer rigid, just weak. Orion stood slightly ahead of him, angled just enough to cover Rowan's forward view without blocking it. His posture was neutral, controlled, but there was a stillness in him that had sharpened, less about caution now, more about understanding. Rowan didn't move deeper into the room right away. He listened, not with his ears alone, with everything. A faint shift, not from the crates, not from the wind, from somewhere behind the far wall. A presence. Then, a voice. You found your way faster than I expected. It didn't come with threat. It came with certainty. Rowan turned slowly. The man stepped into view from the far side of the room, as if he had been standing just outside perception until that moment. Calder Vale. He was taller than Rowan by a slight margin, but carried himself differently, not with the compact efficiency of someone trained to move, but with a controlled stillness that suggested he didn't need to. His build was lean, not frail, his posture straight without effort. His hair was dark, neatly kept, not a strand out of place despite the environment. His face was clean-shaven, sharp in its angles, the kind of face that held expression only when it chose to. His eyes, gray, cold, and steady, did not search. They assessed. His coat was dark, tailored, out of place in a structure like this. Or perhaps, perfectly in place. You took something that wasn't yours, Calder said, voice even. No anger, no urgency, just statement. Rowan shifted Pip slightly in his arms. He was never yours, Rowan replied. Calder tilted his head, just a fraction. That's where you're mistaken. Behind Rowan, a sound, a sharp intake of breath. June. Rowan didn't turn immediately. He didn't need to. Her presence carried tension now, different from before, tighter, controlled. Rowan, she said, her voice low but steady. He glanced over his shoulder. She stood near the far wall, partially in shadow, her coat gone, her hands free now, but red from cold. Her hair had come loose from its tie, strands falling across her face. There was a mark at her wrist, faint, but visible. Not injury. Restraint. You shouldn't have come here, she added. Rowan looked back at Calder. You brought her. Calder didn't deny it. She came on her own, he said. I simply made sure she stayed long enough to understand. June's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. Calder stepped forward, not close enough to threaten, just enough to occupy space. You think this is about cruelty, he said. About neglect. About something broken that needs fixing. He paused. It isn't. Rowan didn't respond. Calder's gaze moved briefly to Orion, then to Mira, who had just entered. She moved slower than before, her body still thin, still marked by what she had endured. But something had changed. She didn't stop at the threshold. She didn't hesitate. She walked forward, straight. And then she stood, between Rowan and Calder, not trembling, not retreating, just standing. That was the first time Rowan understood what real change looked like. It wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It simply remained. Calder watched her. For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not surprise. Recognition. You see, he said quietly. Even now, she returns to position. Mira didn't move, didn't lower her head, didn't obey. She just stood there, and that was the difference. Orion stepped forward, not toward Calder, toward Mira. He moved beside her, not in front, not behind, aligned. Then, slowly, deliberately, he sat, a simple action. But in that space it meant something else, not submission, not rest, choice. Mira's body shifted, not backward, forward, a fraction, but enough. Calder saw it, Rowan saw it, June saw it, and in that small movement, something in the room broke. Not physically, conceptually, a system that depended on repetition, on predictable response, on control, had just encountered something it couldn't calculate. Calder exhaled once, softly. Interesting, he said. You move them, Rowan said. Not a question. Calder nodded. We place them, he corrected. Where? Calder's eyes returned to him. Where they're needed. Rowan's jaw tightened. That's not placement, he said. That's allocation. Calder smiled slightly. Language is a matter of perspective. June stepped forward then, her voice cutting through the air. They don't survive your system, she said. The numbers don't match. The intake doesn't match the outcomes. Calder didn't look at her. They survive as long as they're useful, he said. The words landed clean. No emotion, no apology. Rowan felt the weight of that settle into the room. You took the weakest one, he said, glancing at Pip. Calder's gaze followed. Yes. Why? A pause. Then, because you would come for it. Silence. That was the answer. Not leverage, not randomness. Design. Rowan shifted his stance slightly. Not aggressive. Prepared. You think this ends here? Calder asked. Rowan didn't answer. Before he could, the door behind them opened. Not forcefully, not dramatically. Just enough. Deputy Cole Maddox stepped inside. He was a man in his early 50s, built solid from years of carrying weight, physical and otherwise. His hair had gone mostly gray, cut short, practical. His face was lined deeply, not from age alone but from decisions that had not sat well. A faint scar traced along his jawline, half hidden by time. His uniform was worn but maintained, the badge on his chest catching what little light filtered through the broken window. He didn't reach for his weapon, didn't announce authority. He just stood there and looked. At some point, Maddox said quietly, "You have to decide what you're standing in." Calder didn't turn. "You've known for years," he said. Maddox didn't deny it. "That's why I'm here now." June moved then. Subtle. Fast. She reached into her coat, where she had hidden something before being brought here. A small device, cracked screen. Still alive. Signal. Weak, but enough. Rowan saw it. So did Calder. For a second, no one moved. Then June pressed something. The device flickered, held, connected. Somewhere. Calder's gaze sharpened. "Too late," June said, her voice steady now despite the cold. "You don't control the narrative anymore." The room shifted, not physically, but in weight. Calder stepped back slightly. Not retreat. Recalculation. "You think exposure ends systems like this?" he asked. June didn't answer. She didn't need to, because for the first time, it wasn't about stopping him here. It was about making sure he couldn't disappear without a trace. Rowan looked at Maddox. "You going to stop him?" Maddox's eyes didn't leave Calder. "I should have a long time ago." Calder adjusted his coat. Calm, still controlled. "You misunderstand something," he said. "This doesn't stop with me." "No," Rowan said quietly. "It doesn't." That was the truth, and everyone in the room knew it. Mira shifted again, closer to Rowan this time. Not forced. Chosen. Orion remained where he was. Still. Present. Not escalating. Not retreating. Just there. Calder glanced at them once more, then turned. Not rushed. Not defeated. Just done. For now. He walked past Maddox without resistance, out into the cold. No one stopped him, because they all understood. This wasn't the end of him. It was the end of something else. Rowan looked down at Pip, still breathing, still here. June lowered the device slowly, her hands trembling now that it was over. Maddox exhaled, long and heavy, and Mira. Mira didn't move back. She stayed, between them, but no longer as a barrier, as something else, something that had finally decided where it belonged. The storm passed, not with a final roar, not with a clean break, but with a slow withdrawal, as if the land itself had decided it had said enough. Morning came clearer than it had in days. Light returned to Alder's Bay in layers, first a dim gray, then a pale wash over the frozen lake, then finally something close to color as the sun found its way through thinning cloud. The snow still covered everything, but it no longer felt like a curtain. It felt like a surface. Something that could be disturbed. Something that could be read. Rowan Vance stood outside his house, boots planted firmly in the packed snow, hands resting loosely at his sides. The cold remained, but it had softened, the air no longer cutting as sharply with each breath. Behind him, the door stood open, not wide, just enough. That was new. A week ago he would have shut it tight, kept the world out. Now, he didn't. Orion stepped past him, moving down the small slope of the yard with a steady, unhurried gait. The German shepherd paused near the edge of the fence, his head lifting slightly as he scanned the open space beyond. His coat caught the morning light, the black along his back absorbing it, the gold along his sides reflecting it back in softer tones. He looked no different than he had before. That was the point. Not everything that mattered changed in ways that could be seen. Rowan followed him with his eyes, then turned back toward the house. Inside, the space felt larger, not because anything had been moved, because something had been removed. Silence. Not the heavy, waiting kind. The other kind. The kind that allowed sound to exist without tension. June sat at the table, papers still spread in front of her, though now they were organized, structured, no longer scattered in urgency. Her hair was tied back again, though loosely, strands falling free at the sides of her face. The exhaustion hadn't left her completely, but it had changed shape, less sharp, more settled. She looked up as Rowan stepped inside. "They're running the story," she said. Rowan closed the door halfway behind him. "Local?" he asked. June shook her head. "State first. Then it spreads." She tapped the stack of documents lightly. "Enough proof to make it stick, not enough to finish it." Rowan nodded once. That was expected. Systems like that didn't collapse. They adapted. "Any response?" he asked. "Denial," June said. "Distance. They're already separating Calder from the rest of it." Rowan leaned against the wall, arms folding loosely. "And Maddox?" June hesitated. "He filed a report," she said. "Official. That's more than anyone expected." Rowan looked toward the window. Snow shifted lightly across the yard, carried by a gentler wind now. "More than he expected," Rowan said quietly. June didn't respond. She didn't need to. Near the stove, Mira lay stretched along the blanket. Not curled, not guarding, resting. Her body still bore the signs of what she had been through. The thinness, the scars, the tension that had not fully left her muscles. But something essential had shifted. She no longer positioned herself between danger and the room. She allowed herself to exist within it. Pip, smaller and weaker than his sibling, had moved closer to her side. His movements were still uncertain, his legs not yet strong, but he no longer stayed still out of fear. He moved because he could. That was enough. Rowan crouched beside them. Mira lifted her head slightly, her eyes meeting his. Not searching, not questioning, acknowledging. That was the closest thing to trust he had seen from her. He reached out slowly, paused, then let his hand rest lightly against her side. She didn't flinch. That, more than anything else, settled something in him. Across the room, Orion remained near the door, always near the edge. But this time, he wasn't watching for something outside. He was simply there. By midday, Rowan drove back into town, not because he needed to, because he chose to. The difference mattered. The streets looked the same. The buildings stood where they always had. But the people, The people looked at each other differently now. Not openly, not dramatically, but the subtle shifts were there. A conversation that stopped when someone else approached. A glance held a second too long. A question almost asked. Rowan stepped into the general store again. The bell rang the same dull note. Irene Bell stood behind the counter as before, though her posture seemed more upright today, less folded into itself. "You didn't stay quiet," she said. Rowan met her gaze. "No," he said. Irene nodded once. "Good." She turned, pouring coffee without asking this time. "They'll say it's exaggerated," she added. "They'll say it's isolated." "They will," Rowan agreed. Irene placed the mug in front of him. "But people saw enough," she said. "They'll remember that part." Rowan didn't respond, because memory was unpredictable. Outside, a second figure stood near the edge of the road. Noah Pike. He looked different in daylight. Not cleaner, but clearer. The lines in his face were more visible now, the tension in his shoulders less hidden. He hadn't shaved, the stubble along his jaw darker against his skin. His eyes remained the same, careful, calculating, but something had shifted there too. Less guarded. More decided. Rowan stepped toward him. "They're asking questions," Noah said before Rowan could speak. Rowan nodded. "Good." Noah let out a short breath. "Not for me," he said. "Not yet." Rowan studied him. "You still driving?" Noah hesitated. "Not anymore." That mattered. More than it sounded like. "They'll replace you," Rowan said. "They always do." Silence settled between them for a moment. Then Noah glanced past Rowan, at Orion. Orion had moved closer without Rowan noticing. He stood a few feet away now, watching Noah, not with suspicion, not with challenge, but with that same steady presence he had shown before. Noah didn't look away. Instead, he stepped closer, slowly, carefully. He crouched just enough to lower himself, not to dominate, not to reach, just to meet Orion at a different level. "I saw one like you once," Noah said quietly. Orion tilted his head slightly. No movement otherwise. Noah's voice dropped. "They trained them to stop reacting," he said. "Not to bark, not to warn, just to exist where they were needed." He swallowed once. "But that one," he paused, his expression tightening. "It forgot how to come back." Rowan watched him closely. Noah looked at Orion again. "You didn't," he said. Orion didn't respond. He didn't need to. Noah stood back up, and for the first time, he didn't look like a man trying to stay inside something. He looked like someone who had already stepped out. Rowan returned home before dusk. The light faded slower now, less oppressive, more natural. Inside, June had cleared most of the table, leaving only a few pages spread out. She looked up as he entered. "They're sending someone," she said. Rowan set his coat aside. "Who?" "State investigator," June replied. "Name's Daniel Harker." Rowan raised an eyebrow slightly. "Reputation?" June exhaled. "Doesn't stop halfway," she said, "but doesn't rush either." That was enough. Rowan nodded. "Good." Later, as the evening settled, Rowan stepped outside once more. The sky had cleared completely now, stars sharp against the dark. The snow reflected just enough light to make the ground visible without a lamp. Orion joined him. They stood side by side. No urgency, no tension, just presence. After a moment, Rowan walked toward the fence and reached for a piece of wood he had set aside earlier. A simple board, rough, unfinished. He had carved the words earlier that day. Not carefully, not perfectly, but clearly. He fixed it to the post with steady hands, then stepped back. The words caught the faint light. Some things were never lost. They were just never seen. The wind moved lightly across the field. Snow shifted, not covering, not erasing, just moving. Behind him, the house remained open. Inside, Mira rested. Pip breathed steadily. June worked quietly. And for the first time since the storm, nothing felt hidden. Not because everything had been solved, but because what mattered most had already been brought into the light. Rowan looked out across the frozen land one last time, then turned back toward the house. Orion followed. Sometimes the deepest wounds in this world are not the ones we can see. Sometimes they live in silence, in fear, in the way a soul learns to expect nothing good ever again. That was the truth at the heart of this story. Mira was not weak because she was afraid. Pip was not worthless because he was small. Marin was not forgotten because she no longer knew how to hope. And Rowan was not chosen because he was perfect. He was chosen because, when the moment came, he did not turn away. That is where the lesson begins. In life, many people carry pain the way these animals did. Some have been used. Some have been overlooked. Some have been treated as if their value depended on what they could produce, endure, or hide. And many have learned to survive by becoming quiet. But silence is not the same as having no worth. Brokenness is not the same as being beyond love. What is unseen by the world is still seen by God. Maybe that is one of the miracles in this story. Not lightning from heaven, not a grand sign written across the sky, but a quieter kind of miracle. The right soul arriving at the right moment, the refusal to walk away, the courage to protect what others had priced too cheaply. Sometimes God does not send miracles as spectacles. Sometimes He sends them as mercy, as timing, as conviction, as a door that opens before a life disappears into the dark. And maybe that is how grace often works in our daily lives, too. Most of us will never stand in a snow-covered town and uncover a hidden system. But we will all meet moments that test who we are. A lonely neighbor, a frightened child, an exhausted parent, a wounded animal, a stranger whose pain is invisible unless someone slows down long enough to notice. In those moments, we are given a choice. We can pass by, or we can become part of the answer to someone else's prayer. That is the lesson this story leaves behind. Do not measure worth by appearance, usefulness, or noise. Some of the most precious lives in this world are the ones others dismiss too quickly. And sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is simply stay, see clearly, and choose compassion when it would be easier not to. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from, and what moment in this story stayed with you the most. And if you believe in stories of faith, compassion, justice, and second chances, please subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next one. May God bless every person watching this. May He protect your home, strengthen your heart, calm your fears, and remind you that no life is ever worthless in His eyes. May He guide your steps, heal what has been wounded inside you, and use you to bring light to someone who feels forgotten. Amen.